Okay, so this is the section on the unconscious. If I can remember, at first as a psychology student, I was introduced to theories about the unconscious. Early on, it was mainly Freud and Carl Jung. And some of the writing I struggle with. Um, like, for example, for me, Freud is a very good writer, but sometimes the tone is that I'm giving you the truth. Um, and I don't want to knock psychoanalysis because there are things that I've learned from it, especially the defense mechanisms, and it isn't just Freud. There's Freud and post-Freudians and psychoanalysis, psychodynamics. It's a huge field. And then there is Carl Jung's work, which is also very big, gets into the collective unconscious. And I won't try to summarize it here. I'm just sharing how I dabbled with what's out there and also dabbled into the reactions to some of these approaches. Some of them were like, well, you can't prove the unconscious even exists, and unconscious by definition is unconscious. So we're not going to deal with the unconscious. There is that. There is also offshoots, which are difficult to name. There is body work, there is a regressive therapy, and there are approaches like shamanism, which don't fit into the field of psychology or psychiatry as it is taught in universities. But then you do have areas which are also part of the history, like taking psychedelics, which personally I haven't dabbled into and I have no intention of dabbling into. And today there is ayahuasca, there's also stuff out there. But for now, in terms of sharing with you, the most important distinction that I make is that I look at approaches out there that are either ignoring unconscious totally because it's not something you want to define. They have a difficulty with defining it, and that's fair enough. And there's approaches which are very heavily into trying to come up with theories about the unconscious which are difficult to prove. So where I am at today is that I don't try to define the unconscious. I literally name it for myself. This is just me. I name it as inner world. And I am not trying to analyze it intellectually. I'm not trying to use theories or models out there. I see it, the distinction between unconscious and spirituality, not religion, but spirituality, is muddy for me. And again, there are professionals that are out there that are talking about this stuff. But for me, I'm just literally just sharing with you personal experience, which is very different than being in the position of somebody who is an academic or a practitioner who's trying to define a model. I'm literally trying to share with you what does it look like to take all of these approaches and at the same time trying to develop your own relationship. And my own relationship is that I just call it inner world. I don't try to control it. I consider it as bigger than me. There's a sense of mystery about it. And just like all the other areas, I'm trying to get to know it. But on some level, I see it as something that is bigger than my consciousness can understand. By definition, consciousness is, definition. Okay, forget about trying to define things, because that's a whole trap. And what I'm trying to share with you is literally the experience. And the experience isn't necessarily something I understand. It's something that I'm trying to be with, in the same way as a parent is trying to be with the kid is acting out, the parent doesn't necessarily know what's wrong, but they're trying to be with them, and sometimes things get messier or not, so it's an intuitive relationship. Having said that, I did dabble into trying to keep a log of my dreams earlier on. I don't do much of that work now. I do remember at the age of 21, I was going through a period where I was, my mom, which I hadn't seen for, I don't know, at least 15 years, she made contact, and I was very disrupted. And before going to bed, I said to myself, may whatever it is that's bothering me come out, because I was very agitated. And I woke up an hour later screaming. I was in a bedsit in a small room, and I had a fear that a huge spider was going to come and eat me. And I knew it wasn't logical, but the fear was so primal. I had to leave the room, and I couldn't even get back into the room for an hour. I was literally trembling in fear. So we had to stop the video because there was some noise outside. Anyway, look, I was talking about this experience of this. I invited my inner world or my unconscious to come out. And what came out was, on a physical level, very primal, very disturbing, very difficult to contain. And it didn't make sense to me. And that was the beginning of me realizing that there is something deep in there that needs to be dealt with, and that's when I started to go to therapy. So it's a big world, and I still cannot define what the inner world is, but it is, again, just trying to do, there is so much out there that I got into over the last 35 years, like mythology, for example, the work of Joseph Campbell. There is the idea that whatever is too painful for us to bear on a conscious level, it goes somewhere into the unconscious. The unconscious hide it for us out of our own protection. Like, we don't remember all the horrible things we've been through, although sometimes that's exactly what PTSD is. It's the replaying of trauma in an uncontained way that is disrupting the whole system. So it is a big area. And for now, what I want to name is that the relationship I have today with my inner world is trying to know it. Trying to know it not in an intellectual, analytical way, but it's a little bit like looking at an internal landscape and just observing. It's like going to a different country where they speak a different language and they have their own customs. And you're just being there for, you visit and revisit. And maybe with time, the natives get to like you. One of the metaphors I made in my TEDx talk is to get to meet the monsters, get to meet whatever is internal that is in pain. And initially that's a difficult process because you try to meet the pain and you are in pain, but the more you sit with them, the more the monsters transform. And with time, they start giving you gifts. I guess that's as close as I could get to naming an approach. So whatever fantasies that come through me, it's a little bit like emotions. I'm not identifying with them and I'm trying to embrace them. Sometimes, am I trying to embrace them? Sometimes it's like letting the fantasies pass, not identifying with them. And sometimes it's recognizing something and it's like, well, it's okay, trust it. I remember one of the early, I remember going to a Gestalt therapy workshop, Gestalt therapy as in Fritz Perls, you know, this was maybe 30 years ago. And it was a group therapy, one-off session, and the therapist encouraged us to share fantasies. And I was very hesitant to share my fantasy because the fantasy was I was in a very small island. The sky was red, you know, and the therapist encouraged me to share it, so I did. And I said, and as I started to get into it, more started to come out in terms of imagery. And I said, there are demons underneath the surface. And she said, well, what happens if you let them come out? And when I let them come out, they turned into flowers. And she laughed. And the laughter was an encouragement to trust whatever is internal to come out. And overall, that therapist I worked with one-to-one later on, but that was the general approach she was trying to encourage in me. Now, very important point here is that this approach is not something I'm necessarily encouraging people to do, because if a person has psychotic tendencies or has problems with impulse control or with aggression, whether it's harming somebody else or harming some or themselves, then encouraging anything to come out and trusting that could end up being an issue of safety. But for me personally, that's the general approach I've been taking all along, you know, of trying to meet the inner world, explore whatever approaches out there that I might feel right to me. This is all vague, you know, because the work is vague, you know. There aren't any systems in relation to approaching the unconscious that I know of that I could wholeheartedly embrace. There are other therapists who do that. They will say, no, this approach, you know, whether it's Freudian, post-Freudian, or Jungian, that totally works for me, and I'm going to follow that, and I will call myself a Jungian therapist, you know, or psychodynamic, or whatever. But personally, I don't follow anything specific with clearly described dynamics and a description of what the inner world is. For me, it's an ongoing process of trying to meet, trying to relate, trying to see it as a world with riches. Actually, there is one, you know, there is one general principle, which is call upon the unconscious to meet you and it will help you. And that's not necessarily specific to any one approach. It's out there with quite a few different approaches. I'm not gonna get into naming them. For me, at the time being, I'm just sharing that I'm taking stuff from different approaches. Try it out for a while. If it feels like it resonates and something's starting to develop that makes me feel more wholesome, then I follow with that. I follow with it. And specifically with music, you know, that's the area which for me I would need to think more about how I apply that to music and how I share that with you. But work with the unconscious, there is, for the sake of summary, there is so much out there, and there are approaches say we don't deal with it. I'm in neither camp. I'm open to it, and it's more of a sensory metaphorical relationship than something intellectually defined, and it's not something that I'm trying to rule over the inner world. It's more like somebody who's trying to go into nature and meet whatever is out there and be part of it in a way they don't necessarily understand it intellectually, but they, at the same time they are learning, but more intuitively learning. I think that's the best I can do for now.